Okay, so in this course, we're discussing, today's lesson is all about responsibility. So we went through two cases so far. Case number one is a person who knows a crime may be committed. He's not certain, but he has a hunch. His friend is drunk and saying that he plans to attack an African church. And this is a real case that happened. And Meek stayed quiet and did nothing. And the judge said, we're going to get him for lying to the FBI, but for not reporting is not criminal. So the question was, what do you think? Is it commendable to report in advance of a plot that's going to take place? Is it a moral imperative, or is it a legal obligation? The second case we looked at, which is protecting someone from financial harm. You see someone's car, the lights are left on, the guy's going to probably wake up with a dead battery and be late to work. Do you have an obligation to do some homework to figure out who the car owner is? Is that commendable? Is that a moral obligation, or is that legally required? And finally, we're going to look at to me, this is a very triggering statistic, but we're going to take a look at some Jewish identity based on Pew Research in 2020. So if you want the exact breakdown, you can find it in the textbook on page 80, 3.1. But here you see a breakdown of what people consider themselves. They interviewed Jewish people, whatever their criteria for defining Jewish people. And in the age group of 65 plus, Jewish people felt they're Jews by religion. They're Jewish and they're Jews by religion. But as you see, going to the 18-29-year-old, it's 40% don't feel part of the Jewish religion. They're Jewish because cultural or whatever, but they're not part of the Jewish religion. So that's a sharp decline. Let's take a look at a few more statistics in the book. 9 in 10 Americans raised Jewish by religion, and 3/4 raised as Jews of no religion continue to identify as Jewish. So let's look at this chart. I think it's at the bottom of page 80. What you see here is that Jews that are not raised exclusively Jewish, that means they come from an intermarried home, or their parents are agnostic or atheistic. So only 71% of children from those families don't consider themselves Jewish. So this is self-reporting versus Jews raised Jewish. So only 10% of those grow up to not consider themselves Jewish. So there's definitely this big, it's exponential. It's not just, okay, the youth are less, but their youth will be even less. So it's really exponential, a decline in Jewish participation and feeling part of a Jewish family. And so the question is, someone else's Jewish observance, is that your business? Is that commendable to care about what other Jews are doing? Is it a moral obligation, a moral imperative to care about what's going on with other Jews? Or is it a legal obligation to take action to help other Jews? And I know this is a selection bias here. The people attending this class automatically care a little bit about Judaism. So there is a selection bias, but the question is, what's your intuition say? Do you think it's morally imperative, or is it just commendable, or is it even a legal obligation?
I think it's morally imperative because in Judaism, isn't it true in that we are supposed to be a light unto the world? So certainly we're supposed to share our knowledge with other Jews so they can get closer to being Jewish.
Okay. Anyone want to take a counter view? Everyone agrees with Shelley? Yeah.
A few years back, there was a Black woman. She's not Jewish. She wears a big ring with a Star of David. I don't recall her name. She's very well known. And she was traveling across the United States. And one of the things she was doing is that she was confronting anti-Semitism on college campuses. And she was explaining to when there was a rising anti-Semitism and the Catholics were being attacked, she actually came here locally. And the question presented to me, she was overt about wearing a Star of David. You didn't know, I think she was Episcopalian or Baptist. And one of the issues is that, people were removing their yarmulkes when they were wearing baseball caps, and you could see, the yarmulke, obviously, very fair, very tough issues. But that was the question. If you know, if you're walking into an environment, and she was walking into an environment, she was wearing this big Jewish star.
And what happened to her?
She traveled across the United States.
She wasn't afraid.
Trying to fix anti-Semitism. There were Jews who were arguing with her that they felt that they shouldn't have to publicize it because if they do, they'll be targets on college campuses.
Okay. So there are Jews that feel that everyone should stick to their lane, everyone should do their thing, not rub in each other's faces. And okay. So there's
Isn't that
different.
a little bit different if you're walking down the street and you're not contacting anybody, you're retarded, right? You're not speaking to anybody, that.
But we're taking a step further. We're not just asking, what do you think about being a proud Jew? We're asking more than that. What do you think about trying to encourage other people to become proud Jews? Is that commendable? Is that uncommendable? Is it morally imperative? Is it a legal obligation?
Well, it depends on your approach, I think, also to other Jews, okay? For me personally, I share my personal journey and how the connection with Judaism has given me richness in my life. So that if they want, or has given me a connection to God that I could turn to more than I did when I was completely away from
Right.
Judaism.
So what we're going to do is we're going to look at we're going to look at the Jewish law, and we're going to see how different it is from secular law. And that's how we're going to suss out the Jewish values. So what we're going to look at is we're going to have a small conversation about the roots of responsibility. What is the Torah's perspective on the extent of our responsibility to others? So it actually comes, this class is so current because this next verse that we're going to read right now is describing an event that happened today on the Jewish calendar. Today on the Jewish calendar, 3,334 years ago, this event took place in the middle of the Sinai desert. We're going to read text 1, page 83. Vayanu chala'am yachdav vayemru kol asher diber Hashem na'aseh. The people all responded in unison, we will do everything God has said. So the Jews are standing at Mount Sinai. They are about to receive the Torah, and they promise that everything that God says in unison, they say it together. We will do it. Why is it so important that they say it in unison? It has to be all at the same time. All Jews have to say it at the same time. Let Moses say it. In other words, what was that proclamation? They all said it together. So the Medrash reads into that. And the Medrash in text 2 writes, when the Jewish people accepted God's rule at Mount Sinai, they did so joyfully as one. As the verse states, the people all responded in unison. In doing so, they even committed to serving as guarantors for each other. Jews at Mount Sinai accepted the responsibility for each other. That means I say, God, I accept. And I also accept upon myself to make sure that he keeps up his deal. Because he also said he'll accept. And she also said she'll accept. And all the souls of all future generations were at Mount Sinai. And all souls collectively accepted on each other responsibility for each other. So this is the Torah's perspective, is we already get a strong hint of where the Torah is heading. That at Mount Sinai, we accepted a personal responsibility and a responsibility for each other. what does it mean when we're guarantor on a loan? Let's say I lend Ken $1,000. And Ken, I really trust him on his word. But to make things extra safe, Shelly says, I'll guarantee the loan. What happens if Ken is out of the country, he's in Israel, and I want to collect on the loan?
So
I come to Shelly to pay up on the loan. Now, Shelly didn't get any money from me. Ken got the money from me. And yet Shelly is legally responsible for the loan because she was a guarantor on the loan. She guaranteed it. And that's the same thing. Every single Jew is responsible for every single other Jew. And it's a personal obligation. It's not an obligation on the courts. Jewish courts are responsible for Jewish obligation. Just as each individual is legally bound by his commitment to God, he's also legally bound and responsible for every other Jew. And this is the foundation that creates a whole different summary. So, Yeshiva University, they had their powerful basketball streak this year. And so they decided they want to start a new rowing team. And so they put together a rowing team, but every tournament is a complete failure. So they send the spy to Harvard. Harvard rowing team is at the top. They send their spy, and Yankel goes to Cambridge River or whatever, to spy on the rowing team, and comes back. He says, guys, I figured out the solution. Over there, they only have one guy yelling and 8 guys rowing. So it's a little different. But this is really the key, how Torah views humanity. It's with this idea. The secular perspective is, it doesn't affect me, only them. So I only have to care about what other people do if it affects me, or if it affects society, which in turn affects me, ultimately. If it affects society, it affects me. That's right. That's right. From a Torah perspective, every individual action affects our common goal. So let's take a look at the way the Medrash puts it in text 3. Again, page 85.
On the same boat.
Mm-hmm.
All Jews are mutually responsible. This can be compared to a ship where a hole has been ruptured in one of its cabins. You cannot explain a cabin is ruptured, rather to say the entire ship is ruptured.
Okay, so the Jewish perspective is that all Jews are on one ship, or the whole world is really one ship. And someone could say, I'm drilling a hole in my cabin. Mix out, my business. You say, you're kidding me? We're in the same cabin. You go down, I'm going down. So we're taking it a step further. And in the way, you might say, okay, so you just started off, Rabbi, telling us that Judaism tells us that we legally care about others. But now you're taking it back and you're saying, actually, we really only care about ourselves because we're all one. And that's kind of what we're saying. Yeah, we care about others because we view each other as we're on one ship. And so what happens to one affects everyone else. And you might say, okay, so to what extent? And we'll get into that. But it's this point of view, we're all together on one ship. So if there's a hole in the ship and you're on the boat, of course you'll scream. Of course you'll help. You'll try to do everything. Now, let's say the person is mentally ill, right? So of course the techniques wouldn't be, what would the techniques be if he was mentally ill and you're trying to stop him? You have to be sensitive. You have to do, in other words, so even in a case where there's water gushing through the boat, you still have to be aware of what's going to work and what's not going to work. And so you have to be smart. Maybe you have to be diplomatic. Maybe you have to be caring. Maybe you have, maybe this is the time for a lecture. Maybe there's no time for a lecture. You have to figure out the right solution. However, if you view that everyone's on their own boat, so then, yeah, it's sad that the other person is hurting himself, but it's in his own boat. And that's kind of how legal systems throughout the world look at it, that everyone has their own boats. and we care to protect everyone's boats. Everyone has to be kind to their neighbor's boats and not cause damage to their neighbor's boat. But as long as they're not causing damage to their neighbor's boats, they're entitled to do whatever they want to their own boats. And the other people should mix out. But Judaism doesn't look at it like that. We look at it, we're all on one ship. So imagine the country spent billions of dollars to send a rocket to outer space. And one astronaut says, you know, I want to smoke. I want to smoke. What's the big deal? I want a cigarette. It's my health. All the other astronauts will tell him, what are you talking about? All of us are at risk. The whole ship will blow up. You know, when the Challenger spacecraft crashed, what was the cause of the crash? It was one ring, a rubber ring that froze, and therefore it didn't create a good seal. And that caused the whole crash. Now imagine someone did that delivery, he's lazy on the job, right? He says, mix out of my business. You know, it's my business whether I did my job correctly. What would American taxpayers say? No, it's not your business. It's all of our business. We're paying for it. This affects all of us. And that's how Judaism views the entirety of humanity. That we're all in the same ship. And it goes even deeper. It's not just that we're on the same ship with the same collective mission. And of course, on a submarine, every single person has their own task. And we don't expect everyone to be the same. We're not saying everyone has to act the same. Everyone has to think the same. That's not what we're arguing for. All we're saying is you're all on one ship with one general mission, but each person has their own personal mission that plays together nicely with everyone else's mission. And so you have to make sure that first of all, you're doing your mission. That's step one. Focus sometimes first. Check your own porch to make sure it's clean. That's step one. Obviously, make sure you're doing your job. But if you also have responsibility to help other people to do their job. And you can't just say, well, I did everything I have to do on my checklist, so I did my job. So I could smile and be grateful. I did my job. I don't care that the other crew are slacking off. Yeah, but if they're slacking off, there'll be carbon monoxide all over the tape. What happens to them affects you. It goes even deeper than that. At the soul level, all souls, there's a part of each soul that's all interconnected. It's one soul. So you really are affecting yourself. So when you do a mitzvah, you don't just bring connection to yourself, you actually connect Jews throughout the world and all humanity throughout the world. Not just that, this part of the soul is above time. So you also are helping souls throughout history and into the future as well. And that's an amazing concept that let's say a woman decides she's going to go to mikvah. And let's say the children in the beginning of her, when she had children, she didn't go to mikvah. But at the end of her years, she decides to go to mikvah. Well, that brings benefit not just to her, but to her children as well. Because all souls are connected, especially your family members. The closer they are to you, the more the connection is felt. But it affects your relatives through history. So when you do a mitzvah, it's helping souls that are in heaven already for hundreds of years, because all souls are really one. So everything, we're a part of each other. And this sets us off to seeing some legal differences. So let's read text 4 before we conclude. We're going to end off this section and we're going to move on to examining our law cases. Let's pick an online volunteer. Bruce, you want to read for us text 4?
Page 86.
Yeah, page 86. Joining us from Jerusalem.
We should always consider ourselves and the entire world as equally balanced between merit and guilt. If we perform one transgression, we may tip our personal balance and that of the entire world to the side of guilt, and we bring destruction upon everyone. Conversely, if we perform one mitzvah, we may tip our balance and that of the entire world to the side of merit, bringing deliverance and salvation to all. This dynamic is reflected in the verse, "A righteous person is the foundation of the world," meaning that a person who acts righteously tips the balance of the entire world and saves it.
Okay, so Maimonides is telling us that there's a tipping point. There's a tipping point. Once there's too much good in the world, it just cascades and evil can't fight back. But who's going to bring about that tipping point? You could be the one that's bringing the tipping point with your little action. You know, there was someone you were really angry at and you decided to forgive him in your heart. That could be the tipping point that not only affects your life, but affects the entire world. And this is not an intuitive idea, but this is a Jewish idea that's because you're all connected, this really could do that. Something that your personal action, you think it's so simple and petty, but it's your simple action has an effect on everyone in the entire world. And this might feel so heavy. Whoa, everything I do is, people feel like, okay, I could hurt myself, big deal. But now you're saying every time I don't do the right thing, it's hurting everybody else. It's too much guilt. I have enough Jewish guilt. I don't need any more Jewish guilt. So the goal is not guilt. The goal is use it as motivation. That what I do helps other people. And sometimes I'm feeling down. I don't have to feel responsible for feeling down. Maybe I'm feeling down because somebody else did something wrong. And that's having an effect on me. I feel disconnected because somebody else did something disconnecting. And all souls are connected. But I could help him. I could help that stranger that just ruined my life by doing something good. It'll be good for me and it'll be good for that person also. So everything we do helps the entire world. We're really part of one big ship. Okay. Yeah.
Let's say if somebody, whether they're Jewish or not Jewish, let's say, I'm Jewish. So somebody doesn't have a place to live. They're down on their luck. Maybe they have a little bit of money coming in from the government or whatever, but they really can't live on just, $500 or $600 a month.
Sure.
Today. So let's say I take that person in, let them stay in a room in my house. But there are stories that I've heard where, like Judaism, like where you try to bring them up to the point where they can be more independent. So when that person can afford it possibly, then they help me out, let's say, because I'm spending more money on utilities or whatever, food and stuff for that person.
So that Maimonides says there's 8 levels of how much you have to extend yourself.
Yeah, or time.
Yeah, we're going to get into that a little bit today. But Maimonides says there's 8 levels of charity, and the highest level of charity is giving someone a job or giving them a loan. That's the highest form of charity. Because giving someone a job or giving them a loan is the highest form of charity. But the second to the highest is giving it anonymously where you don't know who it's going to and the recipient doesn't know who it's coming from. So there's a certain dignity in that, which works when you give it to one of these charitable organizations that you don't know who the poor people the charity is going to give it to. As long as you know the charity is reputable, that's an ideal way of giving tzedakah. But even higher than that is giving someone a job or a loan. And you think, well, with the loan, you'll get it back. Yeah, but that's more dignity in giving someone a loan than giving them a handout. Okay. So now let's take a look at where the Torah looks at this, where the Torah legislates based on this principle. So the first is text 6a. In Leviticus, we just read it 3 weeks ago. Lo yisamid adam reyecha. Do not stand by shedding of your fellow's blood. Remaining silent when aware of a threat is a crime. Now, this is a little of a leap because we just said, you see someone dying, you have to help. So that just means there's an active issue. But most countries do not have a law requiring you to help someone that is in danger. If you see someone drowning, there is no law that you have to help them. Not in the United States, not in Canada, not in Europe. There is no law that you have to help. There are certain states that offer protection that if you try to help, they can't sue you. That's as far as it goes. It's called Good Samaritan laws. You know that if you offered help, we're not going to sue you as long as you were trying to do your best. However, the obligation is not on the books. However, Torah considers it criminal. If you stand by and do nothing when you see someone drowning or see something that you're able to prevent. Okay? So let's take a look. Let's read in Maimonides' words, 6b. This prohibition forbids us to refrain from intervening to save others when we see that they are in danger of death or financial loss and we have the ability to rescue them. So this is telling us death or financial loss. If we have the ability to rescue them and we don't, we're violating this statute. For example, if someone is drowning in the sea and we are able to swim out to save him, or he gives another example, if robbers are planning to kill someone and we are able to dissuade the plotters or protect the victim from harm, regarding all such cases, we are commanded, do not stand by the shedding of your fellow's blood.
Iced coffee?
Okay. So the obligation we see clearly in the case, we could apply this very easily to case number 1, right? Case study A, where one friend tells the other that I plan to commit a massacre on an African church. The Torah says it's a legal obligation for you to get involved. You'll say, okay, does that mean you'll get punished if you didn't? Torah doesn't mandate a punishment. The court doesn't have to give a punishment. However, if the court sees that people have lost touch, sometimes people freeze up, in other words, but if the court sees that there's been a general laxity in the society, that the society as a whole is not taking this seriously, and everyone's just protecting their own turf and not going out to protect other people, then they are able to give a punishment. The Torah doesn't mandate a punishment, but the court is allowed to give a punishment if they see that society is lax in this area. Okay? Which is a big difference than legal systems. And again, this course is not advocating that we should lobby the government to actually put this on the books. There are, it's a really serious discussion of whether, it could get a little dangerous and sticky if we do that. There's a whole debate about that. But we're just trying to extract the values from this, and we see how much the Torah values personal responsibility of one to the fellow. And it doesn't say only if you're a lifeguard or only if you signed up to help others. What if you didn't sign up to be a doctor and make an oath? You still have an obligation to do your best to save the person. Right?
And what about just what happens now with the children in school?
Right. The police hesitated. I don't want to.
Right. You don't want to.
I don't want to give a statement on that because I don't really know much. But in general, let's talk in general terms that we have an obligation to help. So secular law does not hold another responsible. In secular law, generally only acts of commission are criminalized, not omission. So here, Meek, he didn't commit a crime. He just admitted he didn't report, or he didn't try to persuade his friend from not doing it. Okay. So by the way, just to be clear, in Maimonides didn't say you have to go report to the police. He just said you have to do everything to stop the crime. However you can do it, do it. If it's reporting to the police, then that's the right solution. If you feel reporting to the police won't help, but speaking to the attacker might help, or speaking to the victims might help. It's not a mitzvah to report to the police. The mitzvah is to find a solution and be helpful there. But in secular court, we do not hold another responsible because it's not an act of commission, it's an act of omission. It's also a possible gateway to totalitarian style government, where the government might say, okay, we caught your friend doing something wrong. You might have known about it. So now we're putting you in jail also. And it's a way for governments to to abuse their power if they had such laws in the books. And it's also difficult to determine a person's advanced knowledge. Did he really understand the crime was going to be committed? Did he take it seriously? So for all these reasons, secular laws don't make it a crime. And so we can respect that. We might agree with that. As Jews, we might agree with that position, but definitely Torah values the importance of taking care of other people.
Well,
And
let me
stepping in.
give you an example. I made this happen many years ago. I was walking into a corporate building. It's a well-known building. People usually go to the lobby and sit there. The weather was bad, so I walked in. And I saw an Orthodox man, young man, who's probably in his 20s, being attacked. He's Jewish. And I don't want to mention who the other person was, because I don't want to get into that situation. And I went ahead and I knocked him over. And I said to the Jewish Orthodox man, why was he defending himself? And he left me there. He got all the stuff together.
But did you see the video the other day? Last Friday in Williamsburg, there was a video of a Jew, Orthodox Jew, Hasidic Jew, walking to synagogue with his tefillin, and he's crossing the street, and a truck and an anti-Semite comes to start attacking him, and there's a truck like nearby. The driver comes out and pushes the guy. So I'm sure if you saw that, you got some nachas.
I screamed out because the police saw what was going on. They saw that I defended him, but the officers weren't Jewish, and they said, "What kind of person walks along the beach like that?" I mean, he didn't know
Right.
the cops were coming to help me,
Yeah.
and it was all on video, so I didn't have to worry about
Liability.
assault or anything like that. He was this Orthodox guy. He had his books with him, and yet he walked off. So was he justified
In walking off?
away from that?
I don't know.
Because you're not supposed to. Have sex.
Was he leaving you hanging?
Yeah, that'd be nice.
You had to defend yourself?
What?
You had to defend yourself, or this was after the thing
cops
happened?
came. I don't think I would have been
Okay,
able to go up
right.
to anti-Semite.
Okay.
I couldn't even at least stand by him
And show gratitude.
Maybe it is.
I don't know.
So the question is, should I be a good Samaritan if I have to see that?
He was
Sure,
just
you should.
defending
You should.
himself.
You definitely should.
Why?
You
Just
should-
because
you
he
should
wasn't a good,
have-
just because the person wasn't a good, let's say you help
Well, he
someone.
would have been able to take me down in a karate.
Okay, let's move on so we finish everything we have to. So the next case we looked at, there's a mitzvah in the Torah. If you see someone broken down at the side of the road, you have a mitzvah to help them. It's a mitzvah in the Torah, right? If you see someone lost their item, it's a mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda, returning lost goods, that we're going to look into at length in lesson 5, but it's a mitzvah to help them. So even when it comes to financial loss, it's our responsibility to help people recover their losses. So imagine you buy something on Amazon and you are scammed. It's a mitzvah to write a review to say this is a scam, right? And you say, hold on, doesn't the Torah say don't speak lashon hara, don't speak evil? Yes. So you have to find the balance always. What am I? How objective am I being? How factual am I being in describing what's happening? In other words, when someone's a scammer, so what do you have to do to protect your friends from being scammed? All you have to do is report, be aware this is a scam. That's it. What's it going to help if you go, the seller is a lowlife, he should burn, and and what he did to me, and you have to be, the goal is to protect other people. That's the goal. Stick to the goal. No need to badmouth, exaggerate. Things like that are unnecessary, unless you feel it is necessary. In certain cases, the only way people will pay attention. We always have to find that balance behind, sharing bad news. There's a Jewish stereotype where someone asks his Jewish friend, "Do you know which restaurant I should go to?" He says, "I know which restaurant you shouldn't go to." There's always, so there's this special mitzvah of protecting others, even financial harm. So let's read in text 8, right? Because the verse in the Torah says, "You shall not witness your fellow's ox or sheep straying and ignore them. Rather, you must return them to your fellow. So must you do with anything lost by your fellow." What's that last statement? So must you do with anything lost by your fellow. That last general all-purpose statement, says Rava in the Talmud, text 8, Rava taught, the verse states, "So must you do with anything belonging to your fellow." The mention of anything comes to include preventing damage to someone else's property. Rab Chanina said to Rava, "There is an earlier teaching that supports your ruling. If you observe flood water advancing towards your fellow's field, you must erect a barrier to protect the field." So if you see flood waters coming and you have the ability to protect, there's stones on the field, you could collect the stones. Are you obligated? Now, what about if it costs you money to save your friend money? Are you obligated to lose money to save your friend money? No. Says, as we're going to read in text 9, you're not obligated to lose money to save someone else money. However, you might be required to lay out the money and then recoup it from the recipient. If you have a hunch that the guy's not going to pay you back, or it's going to be a whole challenge in court to get the money back, then you're not obligated to protect him if you're going to lose financial money. So there is a limit. But the general idea in Judaism, you are obligated to find out who on this block left on their lights in their car and help him to turn off the lights in his car.
What if you see somebody go into somebody's fence, with they're driving their car, they crash into somebody's fence,
Yeah.
and then they drive off, but you
Hit and
got
run.
the license plate, are you obligated to report?
I think it's a mitzvah to help the guy recoup his money. Yeah, it's part of the mitzvah of not withholding testimony. If you know of,
Omission.
yeah, it's a prohibition against omission. Let's read in text 9. If you find your own lost object alongside your father's lost object, retrieving your personal asset takes precedence. So you can only you could protect your item or protect your dad's item. You don't have to protect your dad's item. You can protect your own. If you encounter your own lost object alongside your teacher's, your personal asset takes precedence. Your asset takes precedence over those of anyone else. So before you, what do they say on the planes?
Before you put the mask.
Before you put the mask on somebody else, you put it on yourself. From where is this law derived? Rabbi Yehuda quoted Rav. The verse states, "So that there should be no impoverished among you. You must avoid becoming impoverished, so your asset takes precedence over the assets of anyone else." In other words, there's a principle here. If you don't protect yourself, then there'll be more poor people in the world. And ultimately, you're not helping, you're hurting society, because society is going to have to take care of you. So you have to take care of yourself in order that you shouldn't become a burden on society. However, Rabbi Yehuda, who we just quoted above, he quoted a warning issued by Rav. People who are strict in their application of this principle will eventually meet the impoverished state they are seeking to avoid. In other words, some people, they're so firm on protecting, I'm not going to help that person because I might encounter a small loss. And they're very mahader. They're very stringent in protecting themselves. They're not really protecting themselves. They might come through karma or whatever you call it, eventually to be getting the same treatment. There's a rabbi in Baghdad that lived 200 years ago named the Ben Ish Chai. So he writes in one of his books a story that was going around at the time, that there was a man whose father was dead poor, and his son always said, I have enough money just for myself to live. I don't have money to support you. And the Torah doesn't obligate me to lose money to support you. So I'm not helping. So he was out on the streets. One day he was amongst all the poor people freezing cold, and he saw his grandson, and he said, "Grandson, tell your dad I'm freezing here. Maybe he can give me something, a coat." So the grandson comes home. He comes to his father. He said, "Zayd's freezing." I don't know what they say in Iraq. Whatever or Iraq, they're freezing over there. Grandpa's freezing over there. So he said, "Go into the attic. There's a nail over there, a rusty nail. On top, there's a coat over there. I think I remember 20 years ago, we had a coat over there. You can give it to me." So he goes up, he sees a rag, torn coat. So he takes it, he cuts it in half. His father's like, "What are you doing cutting it in half?" He says, "Well, I'm going to give half to grandpa, and the other half, when you get older and you're going to be sitting in the cold, I'm going to give that to you." So he sends a strong message that sometimes we're so particular, protecting. Maybe you're legally allowed to protect your assets and not lose a penny. But if you're so strict on protecting yourself, eventually when you're going to need someone to extend a hand and be a little kind, maybe that won't come your way. So both things are true. Are you legally obligated to lose money to help someone else? No. So let's say you had a meeting, that billable meeting. So by being late to that meeting, you're losing money. Maybe you're not required to go find out who owns this car with the lights on, or the store that has the air conditioner on. So maybe that's the limits, and exactly where the balance is and what extent, it's very personal and societal. Different communities care about things differently. If in a Holocaust generation, leaving the light bulbs on, is something they turn back for to turn it off. So for them, you'd have to be extra sensitive. And even if you would never turn back for it, you have the mitzvah, if you're not going to lose anything financially, you have the mitzvah to spend the time to help them to turn off their lights. Okay. Let's go. So Jewish law obligates a person to save another's belongings from theft or damage, but to what extent? A person does not have to save another's assets if doing so will come at a personal loss. But of course, as Rabbi Yehuda said, don't be too strict about this. If you'll incur some loss, it's okay from time to time to accept the loss. So a person should spare no effort when assisting another at a loss. He's not legally compelled to compensate, but in other words, let's say you didn't. What happens if you didn't? You just walked home, you wanted to get home, you didn't find out who owns the car. And the guy comes and says, "You knew about it and you didn't tell me? I'm bringing you to court. I want you to pay for my towing bill." No. You're not held responsible by the local court, but who holds you responsible? The heavenly court. So there is a bill, a ledger that's holding you responsible, and so eventually it does catch up to you, but you're not legally responsible. You're legally obligated, but you're not legally compelled to compensate. Okay, let's go to the third scenario. At a soul level, each Jew is responsible for each other. Let's take a look at text 12. In text 12, let's get a volunteer. Genya, you want to read for us text 12 and text 13, which is Maimonides' summation of text 12? Page 94.
Yes, just a moment. Thank you. I'm sorry, everyone. Okay. What's my business? Oh, I'm sorry. Text 12. You shall surely, giving critique. You shall surely critique your fellow, and you will not share in their guilt.
And text 13.
What's my business? One should not say, "I will act righteously," and if others choose to stray from the path of righteousness, that is a matter that is between them and God. This attitude is antithetical to Torah values. Rather, we are commanded to do the right thing ourselves and to see to it that others too conduct themselves appropriately.
Okay, so this is obvious to us now, in the beginning of the class, maybe less so, that we are obligated for other spiritual welfare as well. And if you look in the translation of text 12, it says, you shall surely critique. There's a common translation that says, you shall surely rebuke. But so the Rebbe wrote to Jonathan Sachs, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, Alav Shalom, a former chief rabbi of England. And he once translated it. He took the translation from somewhere else, rebuke. And that's not really what the Torah means. Rebuke means to tell someone off. It's a judgy statement. You know, you're upset someone else did something wrong and you're there to condemn them. Critique is more educational. You're trying to guide and critique and help. She takes a rebuke. So Maimonides actually gives advice, because what's the first half of the verse? The first half of the verse is, do not hate your brother in your heart. That's step number one. You're not allowed to hate them. If you hate them, then you're not allowed to rebuke them. You're not allowed to critique them. It's if you love them, then you could say, I love them, but I don't want to get involved. You know, it's easy, path of least resistance. Let them do their own thing. No, there's a mitzvah to actually critique them. But Maimonides gives some advice, because, you know, think about how sensitive people are today from hearing critique. People are very fragile, and they're very suspicious. Do you really love me? Are you really just, you know, I grew up hearing abuse, and now I have now my friends also want to critique me. So be smart, be sensitive. Just know the general value. We have a responsibility for each other, and it's not a communal responsibility. It's a personal responsibility that everyone has to help everyone else. So here's Maimonides' advice in 14, how to critique. He writes, when we critique others, whether regarding an interpersonal issue or a religious matter, it should be done in private. We must speak patiently and gently, clarifying that we are motivated solely by their welfare and our desire that they merit reward in the world to come. So context is very important. If you could first, so think, is my critique going to guide them? Is it going to be helpful? If it will, you have an obligation to do so privately. Give it your best shot. What happens if you know they're not going to listen? Then you have a mitzvah to be quiet. The same way it's a mitzvah to open your mouth when you know that they might listen. It's a mitzvah to keep quiet when you're certain that they're not going to listen. There once was a rabbi that traveled to his student's house and sat in his house, and he knocked on the door. As a former student that they've been separated many, many years. And the student was a wealthy bank manager. And he came, the host opened up. Oh, welcome. Wow. Thank you for joining me. The rabbi sat down in a chair, and the student didn't want to be the first one to talk. So he waited for the rabbi to talk. And after 5 minutes, the rabbi got up to leave. He says, why are you leaving? He says, I came to do a mitzvah. He says, which mitzvah? He says, the mitzvah of keeping quiet when you know the other person's not going to listen. So you say, how do you know I'm not going to listen? He says, I know. I have something I want to tell you, but I know you're not going to listen. So he says, no, Rabbi, please tell me. He says, okay, if you insist. He says, you know, there's this lady, a widow. Her husband passed away. She has no way to cover the mortgage. And now the bank wants to take away the house from her. He says, okay. Is she paying? No, she's not paying, but she has no money to pay. So what do you want? All the investors, they put in money. They should lose the money. The rabbi says, see, I knew you wouldn't listen. He says, no, what do you what do you want? You took out a mortgage. Someone has, how are they going to get back their money? He says, see, I knew you wouldn't listen. He says, okay, but what do you want me to do about it? I'm just a bank manager. I don't even own the loan. It's not my. The rabbi's like, yeah, you're right. I knew you weren't going to listen. You know, that's exactly. And the person ended up pulling money out of his own savings in order to cover the mortgage. So at the end, the person did listen to their critique. So this rabbi was able to do 2 mitzvahs, to be quiet and to open his mouth to help the student listen. So we definitely have to be smart in guiding people. And the first ingredient is really caring. We really have to care about the other person. If you don't care about the other person, you're just somebody else doing something wrong annoys you. usually the Baal Shem Tov teaches it's really a flaw inside of yourself. When you see someone doing something wrong and that annoys you, it gets on your skin, it's like someone scratching on the chalkboard, that's really God showing you something you have to fix within yourself, right? However, if you see someone doing something wrong and you're motivated by care and concern, how can it be helpful to that person? That person is doing destructive, and I have a solution that he could help himself. He could heal himself. He could bring connection, and so then people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So if you care, you can be a good influence. If you don't care, then certainly keep quiet. Even if you do care and you know they won't listen, then also be quiet. But if you know that there's a chance they might listen and you know that they know you care, then you have an obligation to speak up. Okay? Now let's see this in Jewish law. This idea of responsibility, sole responsibility for each other, it has practical implications. So a person is not liable for another's transgressions as long as they have tried their best to help prevent it. But what if you didn't try your best to prevent it? So then you are held liable. You're not going to be punished, but there is a certain liability that you could have prevented someone from self-harm and you didn't. And so that's the obligation. Now, again, speak to experts. If you know someone, people are very sensitive. People can have triggers and trauma. So you have to be very careful. But if you know you're able to be helpful, you have a legal obligation to try. So now, these are the 3 keys: privately, gently, patiently. 3 keys Maimonides says, these are the only ways you could be successful in critiquing another person. Words that come from the heart enter the heart. If you really care, it helps. There was once a teacher, and he was at a conference, and someone comes up to him. He says, "Do you recognize me?" He says, "No." He says, "Look harder." It's like, "Oh yeah, I remember you. You were in my 3rd grade class." It's like, "Yeah, that's right." So what are you doing at the conference? He's like, "Well, after what you taught me, I also decided to become a teacher." He says, "Really? I don't remember I was such an impactful teacher in that way." He says, "Well, I'll tell you. One day my friend won a watch, and I stole the watch from him, and I put it in my briefcase. And at the end of the class, the student came to you, he said, 'Someone stole my watch, and I'm not sure who it is.' You told all the kids to get up in the back of the room, and you're going to search their cupboards one by one to get the watch. But you said you want everyone's eyes to be closed. And you went, everyone closed their eyes. You went and you discovered the watch. At the end of class, you gave it to the person who lost the watch, but you never mentioned it to me ever. You never said a thing. You treated me like a good student the rest of the year, nothing. So you noticed something was wrong, but you didn't embarrass me in public. You corrected the issue, and that made me more sensitive to other people's concern. And that just sent a trajectory of, I saw your compassion towards me, and that's what changed things for me." And the rabbi says, "Interesting. When I was looking through the cupboards, my eyes were also closed. So I never knew it was yours." So that's why it wasn't hard for me to look the other way. I really didn't know whose it was. So that care that the teacher had really has an impact on other people. It really makes a difference. And that's what people really are craving for and so thirsty for, is someone else to just care, a connection, someone that really hears what you're saying, takes interest in what you're doing. That's the foundation. And on that, people that feel that connection, they crave critique from me. Critique me more. There was once the previous Rebbe put it this way. He said, there was someone criticized somebody else, and the Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, called him in. He said, it's not right what you did to criticize a person like that. He says, what do you mean? I see other elder rabbis doing the same thing. He says, I'll tell you the difference. The difference is it's like a spa, a sauna. In a sauna, in the Russian saunas, you start off, you go onto the lower level, it's hot, but it's not so hot. And then you go up a level, and then you go up a level. And then when you get to the highest level, it's sweaty, it's steamy, it's boiling hot. And over there, there's a person that has like a whip. And you tip him and he whips you. And it feels really good when you're at the top level. But imagine someone came to you when you weren't in a sauna and started whipping you. You'd send them to jail. He says, the first thing is you got to warm the guy up. You can't just come and yell and criticize. The other rabbis, they're spending months and weeks. They're friends. They love each other. So then a hit feels good. It feels good. But when you're cold in the street, a hit feels the opposite of good. And so that's important to remember. Okay, so now let's see where this takes effect in Jewish law. We're going to learn in a further lesson that you're not allowed to take somebody else's property without permission. Everyone agree? Are you allowed to take somebody else's property without permission?
No.
Right? Even though in lesson 1, we said you're allowed to use someone's land without permission if it's not going to cause them a loss. That's land. Land is not going out of possession. This deed still belongs to the person. Versus when you borrow somebody without permission, you're taking something, you're moving it to your domain. That's theft. It's not borrowing, it's theft. There's one exception. What's the exception? The exception is text 15. It is permissible to use someone else's shofar without advance permission in order to fulfill the mitzvah. You're not allowed to use a stolen shofar. If you use a stolen shofar, you didn't do the mitzvah of hearing shofar on Rosh Hashanah. But what about borrowing without asking permission first? Is that allowed? Now, maybe it doesn't apply in the United States. People are more sensitive to germs and other things. But in the old shtetl, where people weren't so concerned with that, it says you don't have to ask permission before using the shofar. We assume that people would happily oblige others to perform a mitzvah with their possessions, provided that no financial loss is incurred as a result. So if you can guarantee that you won't damage the shofar, and you put on, you take some Listerine, whatever, to make sure there's no germs, then you're allowed to use someone else's shofar. Why? What's the premise? Because they're responsible for you doing the mitzvah. And if you're Rosh Hashanah, the sun is setting, you didn't hear the mitzvah of shofar, you know that they want you to do the mitzvah because they're responsible for you to do the mitzvah. So this is an example of an item, you're allowed to use something without permission. So that's where we see this idea. The same thing as someone's tefillin. You're allowed to borrow someone's tefillin. Now, if they told you, I don't allow you to outright, that's different. But if they didn't tell you outright, the assumption is every Jew wants every other Jew to be doing mitzvahs. So they're happy for you. And that's truly the way I look at it in my own home. When I have guests in my home, I feel, the mortgage is less burdensome because more people are using my home. I'm getting real use out of the home. So that's just the perspective we have to have on everything. More people doing mitzvahs. Here's another example. There's a blessing we make before we do a mitzvah. Whenever someone does a mitzvah, he says a blessing. Blessed are you, God, who commanded me to do this mitzvah. Now, you're not allowed to say God's name in vain. So you cannot say this blessing if you're not obligated in the mitzvah. But if you're obligated in the mitzvah, you're allowed to make this blessing. What happens if you fulfilled your obligation? Let's say you were in synagogue and you made Kiddush with your friends. You're at synagogue, you made Kiddush on Shabbat. And now you go home and there's family members that didn't hear Kiddush. Are you allowed to make Kiddush for them? You already did the mitzvah, so you can't do it again. You already fulfilled your mitzvah. No. You didn't really fully fulfill your mitzvah until they fulfill their mitzvah. So you're allowed to do 4 cups for the Seder for them, and then do 4 cups for yourself. If you want to drink 8 cups, you're welcome to do that. It's that idea that even though normally, if you're not responsible for a mitzvah, you're not allowed to do the mitzvah on behalf of somebody else, right? So for example, there's limits to this idea, but there's this idea that because we're all responsible for each other, we help one another. Text 17, whoever is now personally obligated in a particular mitzvah cannot perform it on behalf of others. So children are not obligated in mitzvahs. So they're not allowed to make kiddush for adults, right? If I make kiddush, so I fulfilled my obligation, I'm still allowed to make it for other adults. Because adults, I'm responsible to make sure all other adults did their mitzvah. So it's this interesting concept. So let's look at some final statistics.
Der Salvas Kol Israel Arevin ze beze. No das meint min a viele Aiden, was gefindt sich bekatzwe Tevel und ist sich mit dem keinmal nicht zusammengetroffen. Punkt als wie sich hat sich lieb, on mit Dides und on Agbolis, hat da sein der Ringen von Avas Israel auf der Zweiten. Und in was besteht hat die Jahwe, ist in der Linie von Teiro Mitzvah, sein Nechet alle Jiden, Arevin, Zeba, sie können nicht sein, der Limo der Teire Beschleimus und der Kima Mitzvah Beschleimus, Bishas Achelik von dem, was Kol Israel, Kulam Yachad, ist Kima Schleimo, ist der Chelik, Leisator, nicht Scholem Belimo der Teiro und nicht Scholem Bekima Mitzvah. Und das soll sein verbunden mit allen Jiden, wo sie sollen sich nicht gefunden.
Und wie mir sagt, dass bei Venezuela Arabim, Lazareno Arab, Anegel Lepel, was sie jeder Tag gehen verloren, Nishomis von Bnei und Bnei Israel, was Chas V'Sholem sagen auf eine Nishoma, auf eine Jiden, als ist im Ganzen verloren, aber verloren in dem Muvon. Amit darf mit dem Ton morgen aufbringen im Nenter zur Jüdischkeit, wird es darf ein Ton in mehrere Unionen und darf sie da wieder Ton kommen. Mit der Sache mehr Schwierigkeiten, wie viel das ist ein Ingen, Ikri, und ein Ingen Chiyuni, und ein Ingen von Pikuach Nefoshes Mamosh, aber soll Reis nehmen, der Hero, und der Hero soll Reis in Meise bepeilen. A jeder Nesef Avdru, was tut bei Momene. Nesef Avdru, was tut bei Nishmose, alle Dei, Lilmed und Lelamed, soll Reiche Ton begufe, wenn geht zu Afozas Ayadus, und bei Meise bepeil, gehen bepeil, Mamesh begufe, und reden bepeil, Mamesh bepiv, und bei Weisen nach lebendigem Beispiel Befehl Mamesh Beramach Evrov, Veshasag Gidel, was mit darf lernen in Teir und Mekayim sein ihre Mitzvahs, wo ma viele haben, Mekayim Nefesh Achas mi Yisrael, is Echet Mekayim Kilo Kiyim Elo Mole, Alachas Kama Vekama Vimizetos Befehl, Abekeiche Shal Kol Echad Veyachas, was nimmt auf sich gehen, mäfig sein Jadus. Zwischen Iden hat mich schön gesehen, aber seine haben Matzel gewinnt, Kammer, wie Kammer ne Fosche ist, und Matzel gewinnt in Asami Nefen, wie gerät früher bei der Gehe, zu Meise Chio, a die, wenn es haben Matzel gewinnt, seine dann noch geworden Matzilim, seine geworden Echet Maschpien, und aufgehen und Matzel sein Iden, was einander was zu sehen gekonnt zukommen, mese zibische Tier.
So this was the whole Rebbe's philosophy stems from what the values that we learned in this class, that you cannot stand by and watch others' blood being spilled. And that means spiritual blood too. when you know people are starving and they don't know what they're starving for. So they don't know why they're addicted or why they're workaholics or depressed or anxious, and they don't know. And you have the ability to help. It's not just being kind. It's you. They're a part of you. They're one with you. So this was what propelled the Rebbe's call for the Shluchim movement of Shluchim to go out to all corners of the world, was this personal responsibility. The Rebbe didn't look only for his own group, people that look like him. The Rebbe felt responsibility for all people, and we tried to be like the Rebbe. And I have to say, someone that's with us today was an inspiration to me, that he wanted to make sure all his Jewish co-workers had matzah for Pesach. So he went out and bought matzah from Ukraine, made sure everyone had matzah. This is the idea of thinking about how we can help others and assist others. And who could be a greater influence? Is it a rabbi with a beard? That's very intimidating to people. Very, very intimidating. And they see, oh, okay, rabbi, you get paid for this. So of course you're going to, so they don't really feel it as caring. We're like, this is your job. But when someone who's not a rabbi shows care and concern and encouragement, that creates a massive difference in helping people to make small changes. And small changes are big changes, because they could be that tipping point that Maimonides says, that tipping point that really helps everyone. Moses is waiting for the action of one person. There's things that Moses can't do, that there's someone in the world that has to do it. And he's waiting for that person to do it. And that could be the tipping point that will end all suffering in the world, will end all hardship that everyone has, and we all could use more blessings and kindness and goodness. So we have to take the call to action of the Rebbe and, change the statistics. So case study C. I am concerned. It is the feeling of mutual Jewish responsibility.
Lesson 3. Beyond taking offense. 1. Judaism has a very broad definition of mutual responsibility. It's based on a vision of shared purpose and mission, which is influenced by each action of every person. 2. In addition to a shared mission, Jewish mysticism teaches that our souls are united. 3. Jewish law considers it a crime to remain silent when aware of a threat to someone else's life, and it also mandates that we extend every effort necessary to protect others from monetary loss. 4. The Jewish value of mutual responsibility calls on us to guide others away from transgression of the Torah's commandments. This must be done gently and be motivated by genuine concern for their spiritual welfare. 5. Jewish law also teaches that we are responsible to assist others in the performance of mitzvot. Our own mitzvah observance is incomplete until we do so.
Okay, I hope you'll join us next week. We're going to discuss something really exciting, all about personal freedom, what it means, what's real freedom and personal liberty, and how far it goes. And I encourage you all, if you want to see any of the videos or learn more, myjli.com/beyond right. We have a lot more articles and videos connected to this lesson. And I wish all of you a wonderful Shavuos. We'll be able to receive the Torah with joy. And those that like studying Torah, Saturday night in my home, 10 o'clock, we'll learn Torah. We'll be learning about respecting your elders. We'll learn about the story of Ruth. We'll learn about how to buy happiness. And we'll learn about physician-assisted death. What's the Torah view on when that's okay, or is it ever okay? And physician-assisted death. So we have a nice array of topics, and there's of course cheesecake and nice coffee and fruit and chocolate, and then Shavuos to hear the 10 Commandments. Is a big mitzvah that Sunday, and Monday is Yizkar. Okay, and thank you everyone for joining. Oh, lawyers, listen, lawyers, the code word is responsibility. You don't have, you're here. You don't have to know. It's for the Zoom crowd. Very good.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're welcome.